on a cold, unsettling night that seemed to hang heavier than most, the story of Joe Metheny unfolds like a nightmare whispered through the back alleys of Baltimore, a chilling portrait of a man whose crimes would eventually become some of the most disturbing ever uncovered in the region, a case so unnerving that even seasoned investigators struggled to understand how someone so outwardly ordinary could carry within him a darkness so profoundly warped. It all begins with a hook so jarring that it forces viewers to question how well anyone can truly know the individuals who walk unnoticed among them, because in the quiet corners of Maryland's industrial outskirts, behind warehouses, truck depots, and forgotten riverbanks, lived a man who blended in until he didn't, a man who would later confess to acts so shocking that the truth seemed almost unreal, and yet every word came directly from him, laying bare the terrifying reality that some of the most frightening monsters do not lurk in the shadows of folklore, but instead walk the same streets, buy the same groceries, and smile the same casual smiles as everyone else. In the heart of this darkness stood Joseph Roy Metheny, a figure whose towering presence and deeply troubled past would eventually form the backdrop of a series of tragedies that still haunt investigators, journalists, and entire communities to this day. Born on March 2nd, 1955, in Baltimore, Maryland, Joe entered a world already marked with instability and hardship, a home where money was scarce, emotions ran high, and the quiet fractures within the family structure began to shape the young boy who would one day become infamous not for the life he lived, but for the nightmares he created. He was one of 6 children, and his father, a man struggling with alcoholism and depression, died in a car accident when Joe was just 6 years old, leaving his mother to shoulder the enormous burden of raising the children alone. She worked double shifts to keep the family afloat, leaving little time for the emotional connections that children desperately need. And according to Joe, the years that followed were marked by long stretches of loneliness, neglect, and drifting from one household to another as unofficial foster arrangements came and went. Though his mother would later dispute these claims and insist that, despite their poverty, the children were never mistreated. She described young Joe as a polite, quiet boy who did well in school and never showed signs of cruelty or aggression. These conflicting accounts paint an ambiguous picture of his childhood, leaving experts and investigators to wonder whether the seeds of darkness were planted early or whether they germinated much later, shaped by choices he alone made. Because by the time Joe reached adulthood, the version of himself that emerged bore almost no resemblance to the boy his mother remembered. In 1973, he enlisted in the United States Army, an opportunity that should have offered stability, purpose, and direction. Yet even here, the truth became tangled. While his mother stated that he had been stationed in Germany, Joe insisted he had served in Vietnam, an impossibility given the timing, and claimed he became addicted to drugs during combat, a statement investigators later viewed with skepticism, noting that his stories often shifted and that he frequently blurred the line between truth and fantasy, a habit that would later complicate efforts to determine the full scope of his crimes. After his military service, his contact with his family faded, and by the 1990s, he had become a towering figure in the local bar scene, spending most of his time drinking, using drugs, and drifting between odd jobs. At 6 feet 1 inch and weighing around 450 pounds, he earned the nickname Tiny, a moniker that captured the bitter irony of a man whose outward size mirrored the looming threat he would soon pose to those around him. His life spiraled as he sank deeper into addiction, and by 1994, Joe was living with his girlfriend and their young son in a fragile, unstable household shaped by substance dependence and financial struggle. Then one day, he came home to find both of them gone, and this moment, according to his own account, became the turning point that would unleash the darkest chapter of his life. Fueled by rage, confusion, and desperation, Joe began searching for them in the areas where he knew people often gathered to use substances, including a homeless encampment under Baltimore's Hanover Street Bridge, a bleak, wind-swept stretch of land where individuals struggling with addiction sought shelter beneath the rumbling traffic overhead. It was here that Joe encountered two men, Randall Brewer and Randy Piker, who had no information about his missing family, but nonetheless became the targets of his fury. According to Joe, he snapped, unleashing a violent attack that would later form part of his chilling set of confessions. Though at the time, investigators could not prove he was responsible, and he walked free despite the suspicions swirling around him. But Joe claimed that this was only the beginning, alleging that over the next several hours, he also harmed two women he encountered while searching for information, as well as a fisherman who may have witnessed something incriminating. Yet despite extensive searches, no remains were ever found, and the lack of physical evidence prevented the courts from charging him with these additional acts. Whether all of these incidents occurred exactly as Joe described remains uncertain. Some investigators believe he exaggerated. Others think he confessed to only a portion of what actually happened. But what is undeniable is that this period marked the emergence of a dangerous pattern, one that blended violence and opportunity in ways that made him a serious threat to those around him. His next confirmed act took place that same year when he encountered a woman named Kathy Ann Magaziner. According to his later confession, he took her life and then buried her in a shallow grave on the grounds of the pallet company where he worked, a location isolated enough that the truth would remain hidden until he voluntarily revealed it 2 years later. For a time, the world continued unaware of the horrors unfolding behind the worn walls of the warehouse where Joe lived part-time and worked full-time, a landscape of stacked wooden pallets, rusted machinery, and dirt paths leading into forgotten corners of industrial Baltimore. Yet it was in this overlooked environment that Joe's life descended further into darkness. In November 1996, he crossed paths with another woman named Kimberly Lynn Spicer, and her tragic fate would eventually lead investigators to uncover the full extent of his actions. Joe confessed that he had taken her life as well, and for nearly a month he kept her remains hidden at the factory until a friend, unnerved by something Joe had said, went to the police on December 15th, resulting in Joe's arrest and the beginning of the horrifying revelations that would follow. But before that arrest, just weeks earlier, there had been one more pivotal encounter, one that would ultimately expose Joe's secret world. Because in the aftermath of Kimberly's death, Joe brought another woman, Rita Kemper, back to his trailer under the pretense of sharing substances, and when she refused his advances, he became violent. Rita fled the trailer and ran into the cold night, with Joe chasing her through the debris-covered yard of the warehouse. She eventually managed to escape through a broken window and found police officers who were patrolling nearby, and her report became the first concrete step toward bringing him down. Once in custody, Joe began to talk, freely, openly, disturbingly, with investigators, confessing to multiple deaths, providing details about burial sites, and even explaining how he disposed of remains in ways that investigators had difficulty processing. According to what he told them, many of the individuals he targeted were vulnerable women who struggled with addiction, individuals who lived on the margins of society and were therefore at greater risk of disappearing unnoticed. In one of the most unsettling parts of his confession, Joe claimed he had found a disturbing method of hiding evidence by mixing portions of remains with other meat and serving it at a makeshift roadside stand. He operated on weekends, a claim that investigators took seriously enough to investigate thoroughly, though they found no direct proof that customers were ever harmed or that such a stand had widely circulated food. Still, the mere possibility left the community reeling and desperate for answers. At times, Joe seemed almost to take pride in the fear his story generated, speaking in a way that made it difficult to separate truth from embellishment, and investigators soon realized that while some of his claims could be verified, others lacked evidence entirely, such as his assertions that he had taken the lives of several additional women whose remains he said he had thrown into the Patapsco River, a place where currents, tides, and time made recovery nearly impossible. Whether Joe exaggerated for attention or minimized his actions to avoid additional charges is still debated. But what became clear was that his crimes stretched far beyond what police had initially suspected, and his complete lack of remorse made the case even more haunting. During one sentencing hearing, he declared that he would not apologize because he did not feel sorry, a statement that left the courtroom stunned. Ultimately, Joe was convicted in 1997 for the kidnapping and attempted assault involving Rita Kemper and received a 50-year sentence. Although he was acquitted of attempting to take her life, the seriousness of the charges ensured he would spend decades behind bars. In 1998, he was found guilty of taking the life of Kimberly Spicer and sentenced to death, though this sentence would later be overturned in 2001 and replaced with life without parole. That same year, he also pleaded guilty to the killing and robbery of Kathy Ann Magaziner, receiving an additional life sentence, ensuring that he would never again walk free or pose a threat to anyone outside the prison walls. Throughout the legal proceedings, Joe remained disturbingly casual about the harm he had caused, often speaking as though he viewed his actions as matters of routine rather than acts of immense cruelty, and investigators noted that his expression or tone rarely changed, even when describing the most haunting aspects of the case. This emotional flatness, this ability to recount horrors with no hint of regret, made him one of the most unsettling individuals they had ever encountered. As the years passed, Joe Metheny became a grim figure in Maryland's criminal history, a reminder of how easily some individuals can hide their darkest impulses beneath the veneer of the everyday. Though he never achieved the national infamy of other notorious offenders, those familiar with his case knew that the truth of his actions made him just as chilling, if not more so, than many whose names dominate true crime discussions. In 2017, at the age of 62, Joe was found unresponsive in his cell at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland, marking the end of his life, but not the end of the fear and fascination surrounding his story. Even today, investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts continue to revisit the case, piecing together his confessions, analyzing the conflicting stories from his childhood, and trying to determine how many of his claims were real and how many were twisted fabrications meant to inflate his own legacy. In the end, what remains is a chilling blend of documented truth, unverified confession, and unanswered questions, a lingering mystery around Joe Matheny's life, a dark and unsettling tale about a man whose actions shocked an entire community and whose legacy serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear familiar faces, walk familiar streets, and appear until the very last moment to be nothing more than ordinary men. Thank you for watching the video.